Some argue that regionalization is the new globalization. If that's true, it opens exciting opportunities for investors in parts of the world that have not always gotten the attention they deserve. So who would be the new regional champions? Tackling this question, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology of the UAE and Group CEO of Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Her Excellency Dr. Rania Al-Mashat, Minister of International Cooperation for Egypt. And Bruce Flatt, CEO of Brookfield Asset Management. Our moderator is Manus, Cranny, a Bloomberg television anchor.
The rise of new regional powers driving investment frontiers. Welcome. Good to see you all. So let's dive straight in to the big subject. Dr. Sultan, let me bring it to you first of all. How do you see the state of the global economy, and how important is it to remain resilient in what's been a challenging year?
Well, thank you, Manus. It's always good to see you. Allow me also to say thank you very much to my very dear friend, Michael Bloomberg, for inviting me to this year's New Economy Forum and for the opportunity to participate in such an important session with very good colleagues of mine, Rania and Bruce. I hope both are doing well and staying safe. Now, getting back to your question, Manus, no one can deny the fact that the global economy has been hit hard this year. But at the same time, no one can deny that it has also shown remarkable resilience. And if we take only oil as a proxy for economic activity, and even at the height of lockdowns of March and April, the world still consumed 75 million barrels of oil per day. And demand only dropped below 90 million for just 12 weeks. And if you look at the different regions, if we look at Europe as a region, for example, their growth is slowing down due to new COVID restrictions. Having said that, the US recovery is in an extraordinary manner is very robust, and despite the pandemic. And if we look at Asia, the Asian market is recovering very well. So yes, we need to remain cautious, but there is very good reason for us to be very optimistic. And I truly believe that we will get through this much stronger and also in a much healthier manner. What I think we need to do, though, is to remain resilient and to stay very much focused on what we can control. So if we take the UAE, for example, we are doing everything we can within our control to ensure the safety of our people and to also ensure business continuity. At the same time, we are enhancing the security of our supply chains to make sure that essential required resources and equipment are always available at all times. And finally, of course, we have to focus on cost. This is an important piece of resilience. And as you know, Manus, we have been very much focused on cost as part of our strategic transformation here at ADNOC for the past 4 years. So in short, by focusing on areas like safety, ensuring sustainable supply chains and costs, I believe we can really reinforce our resilience.
Dr. Sultan, thank you for setting the stage. Rania, can I bring it to you from another ministerial cap in Egypt? You've said to me, Manus, we're sitting in November, and it's a very different competitive landscape for the world, as Dr. Sultan has just outlined, than you faced in January. Just give me a sense of how much it has changed and how the regional countries are, I suppose, doing in this context of COVID.
Thank you, Manus. And let me echo what Dr. Sultan said first by saying it's a pleasure being with all of you. But also, one of the fundamental outcomes of these 11 months has been that each one of us has been challenged. We've been pushed. We have had to innovate and think through and push forward. So, for instance, in our case, the first order of business was protecting providing liquidity to households as well as firms, and then finally progress by continuing on our structural reforms that are very, very important going forward. It is very difficult, as we are sitting here, to say that countries have the same competitive or comparative advantages that they had at the beginning of January. However, what is extremely important is that countries that continued reforming before are actually were at I would say, a stronger footing going into the crisis. So in our case, in between 2016 and 2019, we had an IMF program. And one of the key elements of such programs is that you have predictable policy. Predictable policy is extremely important for investors, is extremely important for citizens. The other is that through these programs, you have transparent macroeconomic frameworks. And you are very clear about the agenda that you have set forward. When we were hit by COVID, we came in with important buffers on the fiscal side and important buffers on foreign exchange side. Nonetheless, we wanted to continue showing the world that we continue to be committed to reforms in a transparent fashion. And that's why a standby agreement with the IMF was also signed in June of this year. And the reason is not just for the financing element, but also to show very clearly what is it that the government is continuing to do good. So I think that there is a silver lining in all of this, and the silver lining is we should not derail ourselves from key objectives related to sustainable development, inclusivity within societies. How do we capitalize on the digital revolution, which actually proved to be extremely important during COVID? And if we had not, for instance, in the case of Egypt, with our population size and the number of students we had not done education reforms, we would have been at a standstill. Nonetheless, we were able to, breeze through it in a very, I would say, acceptable manner if you are comparing to other places.
Okay, Rania and Dr. Sultan have laid out a very formidable storyline there. Bruce, you are, I don't know, can I call you the holder of capital, the asset gatherer? Touching on what Rania just said, when it comes to allocating capital, Rania talked about transparency. For you, what is the most important thing when it comes to looking at the rise of the new regional powers? What do you want to see as an asset gatherer when it comes to the allocation? What's the most important consideration?
Look, thanks for everyone being here, and Manus, thanks for the question. And I'll just say the following: what's extremely important are some very basic fundamentals, and we're in 30 countries around the world, and all of them fit essentially within these parameters. What we're looking for, as Rania said, is transparency of regulations and the rules which are going to operate within a country. A developing or developed capital market is extremely helpful, although not the most important, because sometimes we can bring enormous amounts of equity and we can finance from other places. But the number one thing, and often people say rule of law is important, and rule of law is important, and the adjudication of contracts is important if one gets into fundamental issues with contracts in a country, and that is important. But more basic than that is simply, and it's something that we call respect of capital. And it essentially is does a country, its leaders, its business people, and everyone in the country, do they respect capital that's in the country? And I put it down to the most basic or simple analysis. When things get tough, do people decide to take the easy route or the tough route? And the tough route is continue to pay your bills, work through the issues, and deal with foreigners like they were your own money. And many countries over time have proven to be that, and some have not. And when we look at countries, that's probably the most paramount thing we look at is respect of capital. And we don't invest where respective capital does not exist. But that essentially is those are the parameters we look for.
And I know that you and Dr. Sultan have had substantial business dealings in terms of allocating capital. Dr. Sultan, I won't ask you whether who's the more difficult person to do the deal with, but if we listen to what Bruce is
very tough. He's very tough, Manus.
He's very, very tough. Rania, make sure you pay attention now. Get some tips on this. Dr. Sultan, when you listen to Bruce and he's talking about that respect of capital, how important is that as a competitive advantage that you have as a Minister of State and a CEO at ADNOC when it comes to attracting partners?
That actually sits very high on our agenda, and basically, what we leverage in the UAE is simply our natural assets, like, for example, the abundant feedstock of oil and gas, the world-class infrastructure, the very sophisticated logistics, the strategic geographic location in the UAE, the well-established regulatory framework, the financial security of our economy. All of this acts as a true, unique and attractive value proposition that helps attract world-class, strategic, long-term investors to the UAE. Of course, we are looking for ways, and we're exploring many ways to further incentivize more FDI by building on the highly well-established regulatory framework that the UAE provides to foreign investors. But there is one very important point here that we continue to capitalize on in the UAE, and that is our credibility and our very strong, robust, historic track record as a trusted and a genuine partner. We have a long history of establishing many long-term strategic partnerships, and they have always been very successful and proven to be, make the UAE be a destination for very special type of investments. Let me give you just an example. As you know, at ADNOC, we have been working very hard to expand our downstream operations to help create a petrochemicals and a derivatives hub here in the UAE, and in particular in Abu Dhabi and Ruwais. And we're also developing a manufacturing ecosystem that will provide excellent partnership opportunities for many international investors around the world. And as we continue to diversify our economy, there are many new opportunities through many various sectors that we want to build on. And we think that international investors will always be very interested in exploring these new opportunities here in the UAE, like biotech, healthcare, agriculture, food security, tourism, financial businesses that we are establishing here in the UAE. And that will continue to be the case. And we work very closely with our international investors to learn as we progress on what would it take to continue advancing our positioning as a go-to destination when it comes to attracting strategic, unique, value-add investors into our own economy.
Rania, can I bring that back to you? Because I'm not saying that the UAE and Egypt are head-to-head, but if you listen to what Dr. Sultan is saying, when we chatted, you said, Manus, climate, sustainability is incredibly important. These are going to be the opportunities. Is that part of the advantage suite, the economic advantage suite of bringing capital or Egypt as a destination for capital?
Well, let me say that, when you look at the international projections, and during the annual meetings of the World Bank and the EBRD recently, Egypt is singled out as a country that has 2% 20 and close to 5% projected in 2021. And this comes on the back of diversification, which took place, infrastructure projects, which are extremely important, as well as telecommunications. More importantly is that when you take a look, for instance, at electricity, there is a strategy to move towards more renewable energy mix before 2035. And we've seen that come into effect through very important private-public partnerships, such as the Bin Ban project in Aswan. You see that there are now transmission grids between Egypt and the Euro and Africa sort of situation. So these are opportunities. When you take another sector, such as petroleum, Egypt went from a shortage to now being able to export. And we also have Euromed gas forum, which is extremely important, and we export LNG. When you take a look at transportation for connectivity, you find that there is a wealth of new projects that are taking place to ensure that there are kilometers of roads which are able to connect between the new cities, being able to also ease what private sector engagement would require. All of this adds to what maybe Bruce was talking about, and there's this theme which we saw during the pandemic, which is stakeholder capitalism, right? That all of us, whether it's the government, the private sector, citizens, civil society, nobody can do it by themselves. So in our case, with the huge employment that is required, the need of the private sector is very, very important. And so through the different sectors within the economy, you're trying to show that the private sector is needed, is there. You listen to what is required. For instance, when it comes to environment today, in all the projects that are going to take place, investment projects, there has to be a criteria related to the environment. When we take a look at entrepreneurship and digitalization and so forth, you find that given population size, how do you capitalize on tech-savvy population through different investments in the entrepreneurial ecosystem? So there are several opportunities that together with the different stakeholders you're trying to push forward, and all of that capitalizes on the fourth industrial revolution, on the also environmental stewardship that everyone is talking about, and no government can actually put a blind eye to this. If you want to stay in the game, you have to bring this to the table and actually show it in your offering, whether it is to the local private sector or to the foreigners.
Growth is something that many investors are certainly searching for, and yield. Bruce, let me bring it back to you. Dr. Sultan and Rania have laid out what the opportunities are in Egypt and the UAE. Where are the biggest opportunities for you geographically, if we say in this new frontier, in the regional powers? You know, you said in the United States, but you have offices all over the world. So where are the biggest geographic opportunities for you, and industry opportunities?
Yeah, so I'll start with two things that both of them mentioned, renewables and infrastructure. And I think those two opportunities globally in almost every country in the world are going to be two of the big sectors over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that's for two reasons. And with the head of one of the largest oil companies in the world here, I'll be very specific. Oil is used in transportation. Renewables is electricity, which does not use oil. But what is going to be converting globally is coal plants and some natural gas plants in the developed economy, as opposed to the developing economy. And so the opportunities for renewables is enormous. It's many trillions of dollars to be invested. And the second reason why is global solar and wind costs have now come below what the alternatives are in many places of the world. So the renewable build out is going to be very significant. And second, infrastructure is among the largest businesses in the world. Traditionally, it's been owned by government, but the exponential increase in government debt over the last 12 months, over the last 12 years, but in particular over the last 12 months because of the pandemic, is only going to be able to be taken off or financed off the balance sheet of government in two ways. That's tax or sell assets. And when you sell asset, it means getting rid of infrastructure off your balance sheet. And normally that's good for a country because private enterprise can often run them more effectively in the fullness of time. So we think those two areas will be very significant in all countries in the world, but in specific the region. Out of the Middle East, there's no doubt it's becoming much more influential in India, and becoming a port into the Africa and India. And I think the advantages that are being built up by building world-class cities in the Middle East is going to continue to be very important in those regions, because there are billions of people that they can service from those markets.
Rania is nodding. I think you could be getting a call very shortly from Rania in terms of some other new projects. Dr. Sultan, you've had a busy year for me. I go up and down the road to Abu Dhabi. You do more deals than maybe I get special dinners. Look, you've done some cracking deals with Bruce. We know your track record. How did you manage, or what's the critical part of attracting that investment? When you sit down with people like Bruce, and I can't mention the other names, well, everybody knows who the other names are. I mean, you sit down with other private equity and with other big energy companies. So how did you manage to pull these off? I mean, for you, what was the highlight of the year in terms of, because you've done quite a few infrastructure deals, haven't you?
Absolutely. And look, when you have partners like Bruce, I don't think we should be puzzled of how we're able to pull off such complex deals in such a tough environment. But really, I really think this comes down to the fact that the UAE has been able to establish itself as a safe, reliable, and a stable business environment, coupled with a very robust, strong regulatory framework. Credibility plays an important role here. The long history of enabling investments by international investors in our own local economy also played an important role. And as you note, Manus, yes, it is true, we have been able to manage to complete such complex deals in one of the most difficult years in recent memory. And yes, we signed one of the largest energy infrastructure deals of the year with top-tier global investors, including, as we said earlier, Bruce's firm, Brookfield Asset Management. We followed that up with a significant deal to turn our real estate assets into long-term income-generating assets. This tells you capital is available. But this kind of capital, you're looking for this kind of quality transactions. And global investors are looking everywhere for such new quality transactions that are also supported with very strong regulatory frameworks.
Rania, if we bring it back to you, you know, Egypt's one of those stories that I've covered throughout the year that just is a roll call for investors, whether it's on the monetary policy side or whether it's on the government's side. What have you done this year, you think, that sort of sets you apart? Was it the IMF agreement? What is it you think that has pivoted international investors' perspective of Egypt?
I think it's continuous reforms and no complacency. I mean, throughout the year, if we're talking about continuing on the different projects, there was no interruption. Mm-hmm. I'm Minister of International Cooperation, so I deal with all our multilateral and bilateral development partners. We have a portfolio of $25 billion, and just in 2020, that went up by around $7.5 billion. And that is across sectors, whether it's health, whether it's electricity, transportation, MSE, small and medium enterprises, and also the private sector. So this means that Egypt provides a very good story, a story where there has been accomplishment that whenever you enter into a project with a development partner, and that is whether it's the sovereign or the private sector, you are able to finish it on time and actually deliver. And this is very, very important. Dr. Sultan used a very important word, and that is credibility. And that's what we took very seriously this year. So I think countries that have been able and the resilience here means that you have been able to actually march ahead. You have not been derailed by the pandemic, and you continued with looking at the bigger picture, which is population growing, one that is very productive. You're trying to push for more connectivity between the important cities, the new cities, and actually create opportunities not just for the local private sector, but also for international firms.
So, Bruce, I don't know whether you'll answer me this. Well, what's your yield differential? What's the benchmark for yield on Egypt and UAE for you to go in there on these infrastructure deals? Is there such a significant yield differential, Bruce, in the frontier markets versus those perhaps more established developed market deals that you do?
Look here, I would just say the following. We've been in the UAE for 15 years. We've been treated extremely well. We started small. And over time, we got to meet many people, like my friend on the call. And we earned a respect for everybody in the country and what the country does and has done, and we've never had an issue with any contract. So, but it really just takes time and the understanding of places, and of course, if you I would say there is no there's no percentage you have to earn more in a certain country, because these are almost binary events with what we do. What we do is invest large sums of money for very long periods of time. We can't not get our money back at the end, and therefore we need to get comfortable with that situation up front. And that's so we think very long and hard before we go to a country. We do it slowly when we get in, and once we're there, we stay forever. And we do invest enormous amounts of money on behalf of our constituents into countries once we're comfortable with them.
Ultimately, Bruce, you see, I'm driven by trying to get a number for a headline for the Bloomberg. Right, okay, all three, what a great moment for us, because you've got to consider a whole new political landscape, don't you? Dr. Sultan, we have a new president-elect as we speak, Joe Biden. What's your take on the new administration?
Let me first congratulate President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris on winning the U.S. election. You know that the U.S. is one of the UAE's oldest and closest friends and strategic allies. Our interests with the U.S., interests and values are aligned in so many areas and in so many ways. We are aligned on creating peace, ensuring progress, and enabling prosperity across the Middle East. Take, for example, the Abraham Accord. With the US support, we have created a bridge for the first time between Israel and the Gulf countries. We are aligned on creating stability and opportunities for sustainable economic growth. We are aligned on countering extremism and the forces that undermine stability throughout the region and the world. So together we are aligned on creating a brighter future, particularly for the young generations, for the young people of this region. And we look forward to building on that foundation with the new administration. We are also looking forward to working with the new administration on climate change. As you know, the UAE has laid a very special emphasis on mitigating climate change and addressing climate change through multilateral and bilateral relationships. And we do that by leveraging technologies. We are one major oil nation, yes, but we proactively pursue the renewable energy, and we proactively advanced carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And we are today known as the home for the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. And we were the first Gulf country to sign the Paris Accord, and the first in the region to have a very clear set renewable energy targets. In the UAE today, we have the two world's largest solar power plants, solar projects, and we'll continue to advance, scaling up these technologies and helping reduce its cost. On top of that, the UAE has become the first peaceful nuclear energy operator in the Arab world with the Baraka plant that will save up to 21 million tons of CO2 every year. And we know that this project was facilitated, and we were able to put it together and make it happen through and via US support. And we very much look forward to continuing to deepen and strengthen our relationship with our friends and allies in the US across multiple shared interests.
Rania, can I take it to you? A new president, a new vice president. So what's your take?
Well, of course, we're happy that there's a woman vice president, because that breaks the glass ceiling. But the relationship between the U.S. and Egypt is a very strong, long relationship. And the different administrations have been, coming, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, and that relationship continues regardless of which party is actually taking on. But in any event, we do look forward to a next period. We look forward to 2021 in general. I think that we are entering it with positive news. At least growth is continuing. I think that, again, we are looking at the different sustainable development goals, trying to achieve them, making sure that we are focused when we talk to our developers. Official development assistance continues. And so there's so much work to be done, but conducive work. And for those who are following Egypt, between 2011 and today, we've seen so much. So the word resilience is one that we have been to be in our DNA, if I can say it that way.
Bruce, let me bring it to you. It's interesting, isn't it? On the front page of Biden's transition team, it's climate. On the first tweet from Boris Johnson to the president-elect, it's climate. One of the first things that Dr. Sultan talks about is climate. Where's the biggest opportunity with this new administration, with President Biden set to come to power, in your opinion?
Look, we started an impact fund, which is going to be a global transition fund. And we brought in Mark Cranny, formerly of the Bank of England, before that Canada, to help us build this business. And we think the transition from where we are to where we're going in the next 30, 40 years is going to be the biggest opportunity out there. And there's significant amounts of money are going to get put behind this. So we think it's really exciting for the future, and that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for global sovereigns, pension institutions to invest with us in it.
I'd like to thank all of you for your time. I wish you well into 2021. I look forward to speaking to you all individually as the year continues. Dr. Sultan, Rania, Al-Mashat, and Bruce Flatt, I thank you for your time and the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.